Here we are. Here we are. Turn that up a little bit from my headphones. Yeah, there we go. I like to feel the bass. Feel the bass. DJ Magic Mike. Feel the bass. Bass, bass. All right, let's center this thing here. So here we are. Episode number 6, the Mr. Josh podcast. I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about here today. Because there's a lot on my mind, and honestly, with this podcast, I probably haven't taken it as seriously as I should, and some of the things that I plan to do, I haven't done yet, and bring some people in and talk to some people, but I guess I'm giving more about myself, and about the Bitcoin bro, and going over Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and I do want to also focus on the football season coming up, college and pro, talk about gambling and fantasy football and all that, so I tried to establish that. And then you had the strip club, the Confessions of a Strip Club DJ that I did as well. And but one of the things I did also was an introduction to myself that I kind of ran through probably pretty fast. And then the other thing being my rant. I did a big rant episode where I drank and whatnot. What I'm going to do in this episode, to just give another background on me, a real full background, is right now with social media, influencers are the big thing. Everybody uses the term influencers, and that's something that was not a term 10 years ago. I don't think we ever used the term influencers like we do now. I guess you can thank Instagram for that, but it's amazing what an influencer can be. Just some hot thought bitch can be an influencer. And I guess that's how it always was, models or whatever, and people can influence. But one thing for sure, most of the people that influence us are usually from media. And my opinions on media, I probably had a little backlash now. But to jump in, what were my influences? Who were my influences? How did I gain a lot of thought that I have? How did this all come to be? I can tell you now, family was not on the list. That was not where... I would say, if anything, my mother was a slight influencer in my life. She definitely taught me. There you go, perfect. She definitely taught me some golden rules. She taught me about learning about body language. She taught me about how to read people, finding common ground to gain a leg up. So she taught me definitely some interesting things that would prepare me later on. But I was definitely heavily more influenced, I think, by media. I was a child, born in the 70s, a child of the 80s, to where, there was a tremendous amount, whether it was movies, TV, sports, the 4 things that you heard me talk about: movies, TV shows, sports, and music. And that's what our royalty is. And a lot of that shaped me. A lot of why I have that opinion today is because that raised me, and why I'm probably so well-rounded today. So I want to go through a list of kind of how did my head get to where it is? Why do I think the way I do? And how did I get here? Because again, I wasn't really indoctrinated by one person, whether it's like an uncle, a grandfather, a father, or anything like that. It wasn't that at all. Media indoctrinated me. And so if I had to say there was one person, I would start out with, and I can't remember, I don't remember his last name, but my mother, after she split up with my father, had a boyfriend. His name was John. It was the first guy that I really would visit her often, that she would live with. I think John was younger than my mother. So John was a big influence on me. And why John was a big influence was because he exposed me to a lot at a young age. So remembering that my mom, when they split, was somewhere in that 5 to 8 range. So you're figuring 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. John was my first exposure to pot on a regular level. He definitely smoked it a lot. I remember smelling it all the time when I was there. I remember seeing the roaches in the ashtray, and I remember the seeds and whatnot. So I think I had friends in the neighborhood, I think, that were smoking pot, and I was exposed to it early on. But John was like the first adult that was like routinely there. John also liked to play video games. He was the one that would always take me to the arcade. So we'd be in Hallandale Beach, and I would go to the arcade with John, And it was a lot of fun. My father didn't do a lot of these things with me. If I went to the arcade, he would drop me there. I had to be with some other friend, but it wasn't something he participated in or had any active role in. John would play the games. So John was fun because he was like a kid. He was probably fucking high when he was taking me anyways. John gave me my first Atari. So I would get his hand-me-down game systems as he upgraded. So my first home game system and then a television and then ColecoVision all came from John, which was very cool of him. He didn't have to give me anything, but he was cool about that. John also read Heavy Metal Magazine, Playboy Magazine, and National Lampoon's Magazine. I remember those specifically always being left around. So, again, as a young kid, I would pick these up and leaf through them and see a lot of this crazy shit that I, otherwise probably shouldn't have and wouldn't have been exposed to. So that was definitely an influence. John was an influence. John's house was the first time I heard Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight, and I think maybe even seeing that video. And that song had a huge influence on me. I mean, we all love that song now and the drum solo and all that. Mike Tyson knocking a motherfucker out in Hangover. But there's a reason why they put that scene in there is because it's an iconic song with an iconic, not a guitar riff, but a drum solo or whatever the hell you want to call it. And so, yeah, that I attribute that song, and when I see that to that time in my life was with John. At that same time, you can parlay my musical love. So what kind of music was I listening to? Well, my father was getting drunk listening to classic rock all the time. And while I did like a lot of those songs because they were beat into my head, my true love was hip-hop music at a very, very young age. And let's fix this here. So I had a kid in the neighborhood, Mike DeMaria, who introduced me to hip-hop. And I was lucky because I had an aunt who lived in New York that could get me all the music. But I was, 6, 7, 8 years old and fully immersed in hip-hop music. That was my first love. Run DMC, man. Run DMC. I had the first tape. Hollis Crew. Jam Master Jay. Sucker MCs. Sucker MCs, man. I mean, it's fucking just the beat. You talk about Rick Rubin and Def Jam and all that. These were hardcore rock beats that they used in these songs. So Run DMC was on a whole different level from the production. Run DMC, LL Cool J. Def Jam was a big influence on me. Slick Rick, huge influence. Wanting to be like these motherfuckers. I mean, whether it was the Dookie Rope Chain or what have you. I tell a story that in 1984, I went to the New York City Fresh Festival. It was called the New York City Fresh Festival, but it was a traveling tour for hip-hop. They came to Lockhart Stadium in Fort Lauderdale, and this traveling tour, these groups couldn't perform on their own and pull a crowd like this did. But everybody was there, the Fat Boys, Houdini, Grandmaster Flash, and the Furious Five, all the originators of hip-hop. I was big into the elements of hip-hop, the breakdancing, the graffiti, the DJ, the MC. A lot of people don't know this, Jesse, but... And by the way, we're coming from the Space Coast Podcast Studios on rainy Florida. That's where we always do this show from, so check out that Space Coast Podcast Studio. If you're ever interested in doing a podcast, this is where you come and do it. But going back, a lot of people don't know that hip-hop, first of all, it originated in New York City, so we know that. It was in the Bronx. And how hip-hop really started was, it was party music that was really also played outside. It would be in the clubs, but these DJs were literally using the free electricity on the electric poles, plugging their shit in. You're an audio guy. Literally plugging in their DJ, their speakers, and all of their equipment into a free outlet and rocking street parties. The reason why you hear the term breakbeat, well, before I even get to that, DJs were the forefront. The MC, because the DJs were playing the music and rocking the party, the MC came on as a sideshow. It was never about the MC. It's always about the music being played. The MC came on as a sideshow to rap during the breakbeat. I'm on a freestyle over this here beat. And that was, some very common way that they spit those rhymes out. and ha ha ha, here we go. And but what that was a break beat was literally a break time with a beat. They're searching through crates for music of what they're going to play. So they would then run a song, run that beat back, and that's where you had your scratching and your juggling of records and things like that. And that, but obviously he's taking down the sound or whatever, and that they'll run that beat for 3 minutes, and someone would MC over that. But the MC was always the background to the DJ. A lot of people don't know that in terms of how hip hop culture started. So there's a little hip hop 101 for you. I was the youngest person at that concert. I'll go on record. I was 8 years old. I was the youngest white person there, hands down. There were no white people there. It was all black folks and Spanish folks. My aunt was probably petrified, probably pissed her fucking pants taking me there and being there. And she toughed it out with my buddy Mike. And I can go on. There were no kids. And if they were black. Because white kids weren't listening to hip hop on that level then. From Run DMC and Slick Rick and Special Ed and all those groups, I then got into Public Enemy, which was kind of odd because Public Enemy at the time was a militant, very pro-black group. But I just liked what they were saying, man. I never was too big on all the flossing and the bullshit. I listened to it. I liked some of it. But, man, Public Enemy, something about Chuck D spoke to me. It wasn't about Flavor Flav. It was about Chuck D. And I even went as far to get a Public Enemy logo carved into my head, and it was very well done in New York City at Astor Place, a very famous barber shop in Manhattan. And actually there was a news crew there. They put me on the news when I was getting it done. It was total coincidence that they were just doing a whole expose or story on people getting all these funky cuts or shit designed into their hair. So I actually, when I was a kid, was on the news for getting that haircut. I was a huge Public Enemy fan. I think I had It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back first when I got exposed to them, fell in love with them, and then went and got the first cassette, which was Yo Bum Rush the Show. And there was a title track on there of that. Best song on there was My Uzi Weighs a Ton. It Takes a Nation of Millions was just incredible and arguably the top greatest hip-hop album of all time, if not the greatest. It's definitely in the top 5. Tons and tons of hits. Prophets of Rage, Party for Your Right to Fight, Bring the Noise, Night of the Living Bassheads. I always liked She Watched Channel Zero, which nobody knew about. Public Enemy, man. Public Enemy. That was the fucking group. Another huge influence on me. From Public Enemy, we then got into a little bit of gangster rap. I listened to NWA. I listened to Eazy-E. Who the fuck didn't? I didn't listen to any other gangster rap. I wasn't obsessed with gangster rap. But I definitely like the two best examples of it. But I also listened to the DOC, who was part of that group, wasn't as much of a gangster rapper, and some other West Coast stuff I wasn't that into. And then into the 90s, if you're talking about hip-hop influence, two separate groups were at the forefront of what I liked, and that was Wu-Tang Clan and Duck Down. Duck Down being a Brooklyn conglomerate of rappers, and that was Black Moon, Smith & Wesson, which had to then change their name to the Cocoa Brothers, and Helter Skelter, OGC, the original Gun Clappers, and some of the other side people that were with them. But that was the main group. Evil D, famous DJ associated with Black Moon, Buckshot Shorty. And so they were like their group of Brooklyn cats. And then Wu-Tang Clan. Like, it's so funny. Everybody's on Wu-Tang shit right now. I find it interesting because back in the day, nobody was listening to Wu-Tang Clan like that. They weren't on the radio. It certainly wasn't cool. And a lot of white people like Wu-Tang Clan. Wu-Tang Clan made a lot of their money from white folks and kids in college and people that were kind of into hip-hop, but they were more into underground hip-hop because they weren't getting radio play. I mean, Wu-Tang didn't get a fucking radio song until maybe Old Dirty Bastard. Well, Method Man, You're All I Need with Mary J., but that was like an R&B song. And then Old Dirty seemed to get a little love for some reason and got some radio play beyond the others. But they weren't getting shit. Nobody was into Wu-Tang like that. Now everybody's a Wu-Tang fan. It's very, very fascinating. But at that same time, Mobb Deep had a big influence on me. Big L, Big Pun, Cypress Hill, tied into the whole marijuana thing. Beastie Boys, Goody Mob, Beastie Boys. So if you were white Of course you like Beastie Boys. But it wasn't just because you were white. It's because of all the white rappers that were out and what was going on. These guys were by far the best. And they were extremely talented. And a lot of people don't know that all of their parents played instruments. They come from a very artistic background. Rest in peace, MCA, by the way, Adam Yauch. And we love you. And they had a tremendous influence on me because I was a white Jew like these three guys were. And as much as I did like License to Ill and everybody liked, Fight for Your Right to Party and all that shit and Brass Monkey, it was Paul's Boutique, man. If you're a real Beastie Boys fan, it was all about Paul's Boutique. It was never about License to Ill. And then even Check Your Head was really good. But there was a huge gap between, if you remember, Paul's Boutique and Check Your Head. And by Check Your Head, they really went on a more of a heavier rock tip. And they started showing you like, hey, by the way, we're going to play our instruments at this fucking concert. We're not just rappers that wear a fucking Volkswagen charm. We're musicians. And that was really cool to see them grow like that. And if you were a fan of Beastie Boys, and by the way, that was the beginning of what you would call alternative rap, which is so huge now. Lil Wayne kind of went down that angle. Tyler, the Creator, is big in that angle. People that like that. So, but alternative rap existed before. And you could put Beastie Boys in that group. And with Beastie Boys came House of Pain, Cypress Hill, and Funk Dubious. And those were three as a group together. I was never that big on House of Pain. I liked them. Everybody liked Jump Around, Shamrocks and Shenanigans and some shit. Not that big on them. I much preferred Cypress Hill and Funk Dubious. Cypress Hill, man. So Cypress Hill, like if you smoke weed, by that time it was all about Cypress Hill. Nobody was talking about weed, Jesse, until Cypress Hill came along. Dr. Dre put out the Chronic after it was safe, after Cypress Hill came through and was talking about weed, and did just their whole album had to do with weed. I'm talking even the first one that had Real Estate, my favorite song by them, Real Estate, and Hand on the Pump, and oh my God, the best one, How I Could Just Kill a Man, and that fucking loop. Here is something you can't understand. I mean, incredible. That goes down forever in history, that song. And it was in Juice, made it a real cool scene in Juice. And then Funk Dubious, the band nobody knows about. A bow wow wow, yippee yo, yippee yay to the funk. That was before Snoop Dogg was bow wow wowing, just so you know. And Funk Dubious also was on that weed kick, and it was one of the first Latin rappers. It was an all Latin group, and you didn't see a lot of Latins represented. That were also cool, that it wasn't so silly. Like, it wasn't about just speaking Spanish to be trendy or something like that. So musically, and I had other influences. Yeah, I liked EPMD. Yeah, I liked Eric B. and Rakim. I mean, there's other things. Now, so hip-hop is this huge influence on me. Absolutely huge. And I also listen to other music, though. So in the 80s, I would say the three rock bands that had the biggest influence on me, and I probably broke at least 10 air guitars to these bands, was Van Halen, David Lee Roth Van Halen, with the Jewish guy, not with Bango Mango. What is it? Sammy Hagar. Cabo Wabo. Bango Mango. Cabo Wabo. This guy's making way more money with selling tequila, by the way, than he is singing records. But he had some big hits, too. I wasn't that big into that Van Halen. But in the 80s Van Halen, 1984, you fucking kidding me? Let me tell you. 1984 was the first tape in my entire life that I broke from overplaying. It literally split in half. It wasn't that the tape broke, which was a common thing. This literally disintegrated where the two ends of the tape, because they were kind of screwed together, literally just fell open, and that's it, and they fell out. It was done. 1984. Hot for Teacher, Jump, Panama, which I wound up in that country many, many years later. So weird. One of my favorite songs. Def Leppard and Motley Crue. In that time frame, old Motley Crue, the Shout at the Devil Motley Crue. Because that was so different, you know what I mean? And just, I don't know what it was. They just took me by storm. So that gives you some of the musical influence there. Fast forward, and there's so many more other influences we're going to get into, but I'm going to cover the musical aspect, because music probably was the most important thing I found to myself was music. I mean, that's probably my most important medium in my life, and probably evoke the most emotion and something. I always tell people, we watch a lot of movies, you watch a lot of TV shows, you may read books more than once, but the one thing The one thing you probably do more than anything else is hear that same song over and over again. It's the thing that you have the most. You never watch a movie 100 times, but I bet you there's a bunch of songs that you've heard 100 times. The closest thing may be playing video games, but I don't count that the same because that's more of an interactive experience. Whereas reading, music, books, music, movies, and TV are kind of being presented to you. You're not really a player in any of it. Do you know what I mean? So it's a little different. It's just how are you taking what's presented to you? Whereas playing a game is different. You're an actual participant in how this whole thing turns out, whatever. So I don't really count it the same way, even though it's considered media. I think I also left out that Ghetto Boys. When I was listening to NWA, I don't know if anybody's heard anything from the Ghetto Boys. Bushwick Bill, rest in peace as well. But the Ghetto Boys were horrorcore, and they were bad when nobody was doing this, man. They were... I mean, if you want to fucking trip yourself out, and now people are doing it now, so it's not as shocking, but back then it was. Go find the lyrics to Assassins or Gangster of Love or Mind of a Lunatic. Nobody was doing horrorcore. Nobody. Without Ghetto Boys, there is no fucking Insane Clown Posse. I can tell you that right now. Okay? And Ghetto Boys didn't paint themselves with any fucking stupid clown makeup to fucking sell their gimmick. I can tell you that too. They were just out of Houston, Texas, 5th Ward, and they were just it was just crazy as shit. And, yeah, they weren't talking about how much money they had. They knew they were broke. They were talking about heroin and fucking cutting heads off. It was just off the wall. They were also a big influence on me because I was exposed to them at such a young age. I remember, shout out to Jay Marino. He's the one that introduced me. He's the first person to let me hear Ghetto Boys, and I never looked back. Always bought their shit. I then transitioned, so I went through this phase where after hip-hop, I got very heavily into, in the 90s, into alternative music. And I remember the first time I saw a bunch of friends of mine I think it was probably in 9th grade, and a bunch of friends of mine that I went to middle school with that I no longer went to high school with. I went and saw them for the first time in a long while. And they were all moshing in his living room doing whippets. And we had talked about this before. In case you know what whippets are, nitrous oxide, you go to Lecter's, you get your whipped cream container, unscrew your thing, you don't put any ingredients in, it's all air, close your top, put your cartridge in there, hear it pop, crack, snack, crackle, pop, you feel the cold air shoot through the whole thing, you used to suck on the thing and let your brain melt, because that's essentially what happens, and it's like it's like this, it's just really hard to explain, and I would highly recommend not doing it. Highly recommend you not doing it. Much harder to do. We were even talking about this with Jesse. They put these things behind the counter that they actually like. It was like, not that it was illegal, but they were almost like, yeah, we're not going to let people buy these anymore. We'll have to approve every time you want a box of whipped cream chargers. How much pie a la mode are you making? But they were moshing to Ministry. And it was my first exposure to, and the song was Thieves, which became my favorite Ministry song. And but I liked Stigmata, and I liked So What, and I liked everything off of that live album. And it was funny because that live album, in case you didn't feel like showing up live, was better to me than the studio album of those same songs. And live is never better. But my first exposure to Ministry was that live album, and I always preferred that album over the studio albums that they had. I think the name of the CD was called So What, but I'm not positive of that. That was around that time, that was out before they put out that live album. But Ministry became a huge influence on me, and then into the 90s, I was a huge Nirvana fan. I wasn't that much into grunge. I was a huge Alice in Chains fan. I loved Britpop. I loved New Order. I got into the Smiths and Morrissey. I mean, I'm not even embarrassed to say it. I had a giant Morrissey poster on my wall. I mean, it covered my entire wall. And then I had an Al Jorgensen poster on the other side. And they were diametrically completely different. One was like an asexual queer, or who knew exactly what he was. But what a genius writer, beautiful voice, amazing storyteller through song, and a James Dean fan. So that was pretty cool. Something about the Smiths, something about Britpop, I really fell in love with. So during the 90s, I got into a lot of British bands, whether it was Lush and or Moose or the Stone Roses and The Cure, and again the Smiths and Morrissey, and man, I'm drawing a blank, but there were so many. Blur was another one. So really good bands. And then as far as American bands, Rage Against the Machine and NoFX. If I had to give two more really clear-cut examples, Rage Against the Machine and NoFX were huge musical influences. Rage Against the Machine because they had that hip-hop vibe with the rock music, and they played their instruments so very well. And then as far as punk went, I loved punk music. I kind of liked hardcore, but I loved California melodic punk, and NoFX to me was the best one. Bad Religion was cool. Offspring, catchy, played out, famous. Pennywise, cool, but NoFX, I don't know what it was. Maybe because they had two Jews in the band and a lead singer, Fat Mike. Shout out to Fat Mike and Eric Melvin, the two Jews, El Jefe, and I draw a blank on the last guy, the bass guy. I think. But anyways, NoFX was also a really, really cool band and really dug their shit. At that same time is also when I got into EDM. I really, really, really loved electronic sounds. I love a lot of 80s music. I'm not going to go into all those 80s, but I'm also, because I was a child of the 80s, everything that was on the radio I liked from the 80s. No need to go into any of those groups. Maybe Duran Duran was a big influence. I wanted to cut my hair and look like Simon Le Bon. I thought he was so attractive. If I could look like Simon Le Bon, I would be able to fuck everybody. And but EDM to this day, I love electronic music. I liked electronic hip hop, whether it was Planet Rock and all that. Avicii I found amazing. But going back, Aphex Twin, Daft Punk, Tiesto, Flux Pavilion Now, Ferry Corsten, Moby. I listened to Josh Wink. I was exposed to 808 State, Quadrophonia, Carl Cox, Armin van Helden, Armin van Buuren. You know, the old school, the real old school EDM had a huge influence on me. Plastic Man. I love Richie Hawtin. Very experimental. Loved Plastic Man. So, and then if I had to say, reggae music was also a tremendous influence. I love reggae music. And while I liked Bob Marley, and I was exposed to Bob Marley like everybody on a large level first, I liked Peter Tosh more. And I think it was in line with my Public Enemy thing, because Peter Tosh was the Malcolm X to Bob Marley's Martin Luther King. Peter Tosh was angry, and I liked his anger. I don't know what it was, but for me, it was just a different... Bob Marley was really happy and love, and while Peter Tosh had some songs like that, I would say that as a whole, they were very, very different in terms of how that went. So I think that covers a lot of the music. This is probably a good time to go into our first break, right? So we've covered it all: the hip-hop, the reggae, the rock music, the 90s, doing whippets. We're going to break, EDM, everybody I named. Go fucking Google them, find them, and listen to this shit. It's going to make you a better person like it did me.
Hello, America. We are Ruthless Politics, Vladimir Putin's favorite podcast.
Hello, American podcast listeners. I am Vladimir Putin. I like this podcast. I like this guy Trees. Kid Groening, not so much.
Tune in every Tuesday for Ruthless Politics Podcast, live from Moscow. Just kidding, folks. Live from the Space Coast Podcast Studios in sunny Florida.
No, but for real, every Tuesday, check it out. And you could see it on the YouTube, the Facebook, and the Twitter and Instagram.
All right. This is Doug Monda.
This is Karen Monda.
And Chris Hadaway.
And we're the host of Survive, the new podcast brought to you by the Survive First Foundation, a nonprofit organization assisting first responders and their families in need of mental health support due to the lifestyle of being a first responder. So, Chris, tell us what we're going to have.
We're coming to you from retired and active law enforcement officers as well as their spouses to discuss the responder life.
Don't forget, this is an unedited and raw podcast, so we need your interactive suggestions and advice to help us help others.
So find us live on our Survive First Facebook page and join in the conversation, or find us on demand on Spotify, iTunes, or anywhere you listen to podcasts, from the Space Coast Podcast Network to you.
All right.
You're listening to Space Coast Podcast, home of the greatest podcasts on the Space Coast. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or having your own show, email us at spacecoastpodcast@hotmail.com. Space Coast Podcast. Talk hard!
We're back. Hey, my blue eyes. Blue mic, blue eyes. Let's put these back on so I don't look so ugly. Okay. So, folks, episode number 6, the Mr. Josh podcast. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, the same handle. Actually, it's not the same. It's MisterJoshW is my handle on those two. You can find the podcast at themisterjoshpodcast.com. It'll take you right to the page. And then my YouTube channel, you can just find that. I don't think I've qualified yet for that vanity. So you can also find a Facebook fan page, the Mr. Josh Podcast. And if you just put that in on YouTube, you'll find my shit. And I break this down into clips, and Jesse puts a nice little video package here together and all that good stuff. Oh, you know, we left out the side thing that has the channels, Jesse. The podcast things or whatever that was on the side. I like that. Maybe we can add that in the future again. We got to remember that. Yeah, and that's that side panel. Remember how we did that last time? All right, so moving ahead, we went over a lot of the music that influenced your boy Yeshua here. But let's talk about another influence of mine, TV. Boy, TV. I was like fucking Chip from the Cable Guy. TV had a tremendous influence on me because I got cable TV so early in my life. So obviously, if you have all these channels at your disposal, you're going to watch them. And my daddy would go to bed so early, passed out from Southern Comfort, that I got to watch whatever I wanted. So I got to watch everything that was on Skinamax and HBO. And you also had the invention of cable news. So that was a big thing, just getting exposed to so much TV-wise. I can't say, well, I don't think I was such a fan. There were certain shows I liked. I loved Three's Company. I remember that. John Ritter was always one actor I really liked. I don't know why I liked Three's Company, but that was a show that made me laugh. I watched a lot of shows my father made me watch. So I watched Hill Street Blues, and I watched Hee Haw, and I watched Barney Miller. And I watched Golden Girls because my mother and Joel watched that. I mean, there were certain standout shows that I watched. I would say one of the most influential shows, though, was Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live was very, very important to me because that was my first exposure to just routine funniness and seeing them do this live. And the same guy that got me into hip hop got me into Saturday Night Live. It was one of my favorite shows of all time. I don't watch it anymore. I'm not as much big a fan as what they have going on or who their cast is. And they've definitely lost their way. Anybody that thinks it's anywhere near it was. None of these people are legitimate movie stars, and it's just not as funny, man. I mean, you can go after Donald Trump every episode or do whatever. It doesn't have to be political all the time. I just think they really lost their way. But whatever. Comedy as a whole maybe has lost its way a little bit. But cable TV was huge. Saturday Night Live probably huger, and Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy was the main player when I really got into Saturday Night Live. I wasn't as big and I wasn't as exposed with that original cast with Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi and Jane Curtin and Chevy Chase. I was not into that group. I was into the next group that had Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy and Tim Kazurinsky and Andrea Martin, which eventually led into the Christopher Guest, Billy Crystal. I found Jim Belushi to be funnier than John Belushi. I thought the stuff he was in was always funnier. Give him the Queen. Give him the Queen, why don't you? It was so funny. They had the Bobby Knight character as the chess coach. and he's flipping out on the sidelines over chess. It's one of the funniest fucking skits, man. And it's at one part where the kid, he just makes a move, and he's like, Jesus Christ. He's screaming on the sideline, and that's it. Give him the queen. And obviously, you'd never see a chess coach act like that, but it was just so funny. I thought Jim Belushi was great. Saturday Night Live is a huge influence. The Kids in the Hall was a huge influence. Skit comedy as a whole was a huge influence for me. So as far as TV goes, that was for sure. I watched a lot of wrestling. I knew it was fake. I respect these guys tremendously. It was a male soap opera. I loved the mic shit. I liked the wrestling. It was during that Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair era. To this day, I have Ric Flair on my phone. Jesse heard it as a notification tone. And that's another thing that's funny. Everyone fucking loves Ric Flair now. Matter of fact, he's part of a Cumberland Farms ad campaign right now. If you drive to Cumberland Farms, you'll see pictures of him outside pushing coffee and donuts and some shit in his robe, whatever. So he landed, I mean, if you can imagine, all those years later, Ric Flair's landing mega deals, still pushing his brand. And it's quite amazing. God bless Ric Flair, because we're going to lose Ric Flair soon. He's had some serious health problems. But yeah, I always preferred NWA wrestling over WWF, watched them both. So yeah, stand-up comedy. The two other stand-up comics back in the day that I had tremendous love for, Eddie Murphy being number one. I liked Richard Pryor. He was funny. Didn't like Bill Cosby. Never found him funny. There were other comics that I did find funny, but George Carlin. This guy has had as much influence on me as anyone on this list of anything I'm going to explain. This guy, especially as he got older, was a little more bitter, but was the smartest motherfucker that you could hear talk on just a regular level. Not an intellectual through, college, and degrees and doctorates and all that. I'm just talking about a guy who just fucking had the common sense. And you're watching so much of this happening today where you're not allowed to say anything. Everything has a new terminology. You can't even say manhole, you asshole. That's where we're at. You can't even say the fucking word manhole. We should be crying over that. If that's not control over your life, that they are now dictating how you talk, and they always said in these books, and which is a part of my influence as well, it won't even be the government do it. Society will do it to us. It's going to be a societal norm where they'll deem it what's right and what's wrong, how the N-word's allowed to be used and who can use it. I should do an hour on the fucking N-word and debate anybody on it, because it's an all unwritten rule. So who knows what the real rules are to the N-word? Well, ER is not allowed. A is allowed. If you're black, you can say it, but some black folks don't like that. Say they don't believe. Not all black folks believe that you can say it. Oh, white people that are downer, it's allowed. What about Spanish people? It's allowed, but maybe not. Asian people, we don't know. All these fucking rules today, so stupid. And that came about with George Carlin, who was the first one to tell you about that garbage men now had to be called sanitation engineers. I remember he talked about a water landing. In the event that we have a water landing, you'll need... He says it's a fucking crash. A water landing? The plane's going down in the water. Listen, if you don't watch George... You should make it a require that you watch every George Carlin special. He had a big HBO contract. This guy, if you don't learn shit from this guy, you don't have to agree with him. He's not necessarily he's definitely a lefty, and he's definitely a no-war type guy, a hippie type for sure, and that's from the era he comes from. But this guy, man, was as smart as anybody that was talking. And I can go on and on about George Carlin, but, I mean, it's just a must. You got to see this guy. Chris Rock's also another incredible comic. Bring the Pain is as good as anything I've ever seen. And Dave Chappelle, but I guess these are all influences of mine. Dave Chappelle, another phenomenal comic. Couldn't be denied. Fuck Half Baked. I liked Half Baked. Yeah, it's okay. This guy's way more elevated above that. That shit was dumb shit. Stoner shit. I hated Pineapple Express. They made it already. It was called Half Baked, Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen ain't as good as people think, man. They sucked this guy's dick. He made that movie where he gets that hot chick. Not on God's green earth is that movie real. And then he just did another one, by the way. He has a thing about that. He just did another movie, I think, with Charlize Theron, where she's older, he's older, and he hooks up with, like, another odd couple scenario. Fuck you, dude. He's so awkward, man. I don't even know if he's autistic or what. He's so awkward. I'm a semi-fan, but I fell off of his bandwagon, too. He's too fucking virtuous for me. He's on some bullshit. All right. Andrew Dice Clay, other one. Andrew Dice Clay, shock factor, amazing. Played that role of the greaser, amazing. This is a Jew who played an Italian. Then he cries on Arsenio Hall. I'm Andrew Clay Silverstein. I'm from Brooklyn. My mother, I'm Andrew Clay Silverstein. And that was such a great, great moment. It was a great moment for TV. We all loved it. Andrew Dice Clay, man, another huge influence. Nobody was as dirty in our era and as shocking. And I mean, the Me Too movement should go listen to this guy's old shit, and then you can go and have a pacemaker put in because you're having a heart attack. You know what I mean? Your heart's gonna literally palpitate listening to Andrew Dice Clay. That's for sure. That is for sure. Before we go to our second break, I'm going to wrap up this segment with sports stars. I'm not too starstruck, honestly, as you can see. My lists are pretty small, and I gave this some thought before. I would have to say in my lifetime, there were only 4 athletes that I truly, truly followed, cared about, admired, and just had a real interest in. Maybe 5. There's a 5th one with a caveat. The 4 was Don Mattingly, the first baseman of the New York Yankees from 1984 to, I think, 90 shit. I don't know. Mid-90s, somewhere around there, he retired. Excuse me. He's a manager now. Don Mattingly was a class act. I love Don Mattingly. Class act. And I was a huge Yankees fan, so that made sense. Dwight Gooden, the other New York team. I loved Dwight Gooden, pitcher for the New York Mets. At his time, at his age, the most amazing pitcher we'd ever seen. It was just ironic that Roger Clemens came up right next to him, and we had this 1-2 punch of 2 of the most amazing pitchers that ever lived. Clemens kept it going for longer, but, man, God bless Dwight Gooden. He's also had a lot of drug problems, and he's had a hard time in life since, and it's a shame, but I wish the best for Dwight. I think he just got in trouble again, honestly. And I watched that Doc and Darryl documentary. It was heartbreaking. It brought me to tears. Just to see how diametrically different they were. I feel for Dwight Gooden because in his era, what an amazing, amazing pitcher. And to do it in New York and all that. Tampa boy, by the way, Florida boy. Charles Barkley in basketball, I love that he was the bad guy. It ain't the Charles from Phoenix. I'm talking about the Charles from Philly that spat in that girl's face on the sidelines or whoever he did. This guy, the round mound of rebound, this guy was a mean motherfucker. And I just loved his attitude and the way he played. And he was just out of the box. While Magic Johnson was grinning and Larry Bird was everybody's favorite, and Michael Jordan, of course, everyone loved Michael Jordan. Charles Barkley. I liked Patrick Ewing as well because I was a Knicks fan, but he didn't really have an influence on me. I liked the way he played, whatever. But Charles Barkley just had that thing. And if I had to throw one more in there because I was a Raiders fan, I would say it was Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson, you will never see ever. Bo knows. You will never see another guy play 2 sports like that on the level that he did. Deion Sanders did it. He tried. He was good. Not as good as Bo Jackson. Although, shout out to Deion Sanders. Bo Jackson just did it in 2 separate seasons. Deion Sanders played both on the same day. He took a helicopter and played a baseball game and a football game on the same fucking day. We're going to go to break and leave you on that note. Don Mattingly, Lawrence Taylor, Dwight Gooden, Charles Barkley, Bo Jackson, 5 amazing, amazing athletes. Google them if you don't know who they are. There was life before 2019.
Hey, I'm Vinny with the all-new Vinny Marino podcast. I want you to join me every other Monday as we tackle all the craziest headlines from around Florida and truly explore and uncover what's missing. Also, we will invite the exciting guests from our community who have seen it all and aren't afraid to spill the beans about it. And finally, we can't forget about Vinny's top 3 rants and raves about traffic, restaurants, and events. Join us on Facebook as we go live and bring you behind the scenes of each show and let you be a part of it. The Vinny Marino Podcast, all Space Coast, super raw and unedited, straight to your dome all the time, live from the Space Coast Podcast Studios. Listen everywhere you find podcasts.
Steven,
Why, yes, Christopher.
what are you doing?
I am scribing down some ideas for the next podcast of the Black Dog Confessional.
Oh, Mitzi had spoke of that. She said it is rather wonderful.
Well, you know, we try to succeed, Christopher. We try to succeed. We're talking about all the proper etiquette techniques that we can this week.
Do you think everyone is listening?
I definitely believe so, Christopher.
Well, if they're not, they better get on their game!
You're listening to Space Coast Podcast, home of the greatest podcasts on the Space Coast. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or having your own show, email us at spacecoastpodcast@hotmail.com.
Space Coast Podcast.
Talk hard!
I probably left out Faith No More. They had a little bit of that crazy factor. Mike Patton, Mr. Bungle. I liked Crazy. I don't even want to go into it. Serial killers had an influence on me, I feel like. Marilyn Manson had an influence on me. I give a lot of credit to Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson will go down in history in our Smithsonian, whether you like that or not. He just up this a little bit more, Jesse. I think it's just a little, better, a little better. Okay. Yeah, Marilyn Manson, like it or not, he made an indelible mark. All right, we're wrapping it up. If it's okay, we may go 5 minutes over. I want to squeeze all this in, but I'm going to do my best. So we'll see what we can do. But we are at the Space Coast Podcast Studios. This is the Mr. Josh Podcast. It's episode number 6. We're churning our way to our 10th show, the big anniversary show. Let's just jump right in. Movies are also a huge influence on me. I prefer movies over TV. I think there's more artistic merit that goes into movies. I did production assistant work for a couple of directors. I learned a lot about the movie making craft. And I happen to have done that in the 90s, right after high school, when indie film was rivaling indie music. So when Nirvana and all that shit was very big, we also had a phase of 90s film that really took off in for indie film. I'm going to shoot through, because I made a little list that I think it's important, because I want people to hear these. Whoa. Okay. Because I want people to hear these so that they can check these out for themselves, because there's some really, really good movies that I want you to understand. So in the 90s, like one of the first big directors that had an influence on me was Spike Lee. Spike Lee, some must-see movies of Spike Lee. Do the Right Thing. Incredible. I'm not going to go into what these movies are or anything like that. We definitely don't have that time. But I want to go through these directors that had an influence on me. Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, and Clockers were some of his biggest movies. At that same time, Darren Aronofsky, he did Pi, he did Requiem for a Dream, he did The Wrestler, and he did Black Swan, another amazing director. Some of my favorites from Gus Van Sant were Drugstore Cowboy with Matt Dillon, My Own Private Idaho, a very, very crazy movie with Keanu Reeves and River Phoenix before he died, and Elephant, which was much later on, but Gus Van Sant, another incredible director. Richard Linklater from the 90s. He did Slacker. He did Dazed and Confused, Before Sunrise, Bernie, and A Scanner Darkly, another incredible director. One of my favorite of all time was David O. Russell. David O. Russell did Spanking the Monkey. He also did Flirting with Disaster, one of my favorite all-time movies. Ben Stiller in an adoption flick where he goes to all the wrong houses and the wrong people she keeps sending him to. Fucking incredible. So funny. Three Kings and the Fighter. David O. Russell, amazing. Some older directors that had a big influence on me. Stanley Kubrick, Spartacus, Lolita, A Clockwork Orange, Dr. Strangelove, 2001. These are all must-see movies. Remember what I'm telling you here, because if you didn't see all these, you must. The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut. One of the most incredible directors of our time. I was a fan of Spike Jonze. He did Her, Adaptation, amazing. Being John Malkovich. I'm leaving movies out these people did, but I'm talking about some of the ones that had the biggest influence on me. Another interesting director from the 90s, Todd Solondz, and he did stuff that really skewered American society. I view him as a modern-day more John Waters, but he did Welcome to the Dollhouse, Happiness, Storytelling, and Palindromes. John Waters, another one. He shocked me. When I worked at a video store in New York City where I got exposure to a lot of this. So a big reason why I got so into film also was because I really got exposed to all of this at a really cool indie video store that I talked about in that previous podcast. John Waters did Pink Flamingos, Polyester, Hairspray, Crybaby, Pecker, and Serial Mom. Incredible stuff. The Hughes brothers, they did Menace to Society and Dead Presidents, 2 awesome movies. I wasn't that big on Boys in the Hood. I always felt that Menace to Society was better and Dead Presidents was better than all of them. Another big favorite of mine, people don't know, Abel Ferrara. Another 90s guy, Driller Killer, Miss 45, King of New York with Christopher Walken. Go look at the fucking list of actors and actresses that were in King of New York. Wesley Snipes, David Caruso was in that. Christopher Walken, Steve Buscemi when he was a nobody. Incredible. He also did Bad Lieutenant with Harvey Keitel, The Funeral, and The Addiction. Incredible indie film. Paul Thomas Anderson. These are really all influences of mine. I've seen every one of these movies that I'm listing. They all were very big to me. Movies had a tremendous influence on me. And how it shaped my mind and what I was basically, I kicked that, and whatever I was exposed to from these movies. Paul Thomas Anderson, Boogie Nights, Hard Eight, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, incredible stuff. Martin Scorsese, everybody knows this guy's shit, but you have to see the old stuff. You have to see Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Last Temptation of Christ, Goodfellas, Casino, Bringing Out the Dead with Nicolas Cage, The Departed, Wolf of Wall Street. David Lynch, he made Eraserhead, The Elephant Man, Dune, Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive. Big indie director, huge indie hits. And we're almost done here. Brian De Palma, he did Carrie, Dress to Kill, Blowout, Scarface. Scarface wasn't as, I don't know if you know this, Jesse. Scarface, when it was in the theaters, was a bomb. Scarface made a lot of money and did its thing afterwards through rap music, and it just became a cult classic because of what it was. When it came out, was not a success that people think it was. Body Double, Casualties of War, Untouchables, and Carlito's Way. Brian De Palma, amazing director. And Wes Anderson, another one of my favorite all-time movies is Bottle Rocket. If you have not seen Bottle Rocket, I cry during Bottle Rocket, man. I'm just a sap. I loved the friendship in the movie. I loved Owen and Luke Wilson, especially back then. There was just such an innocence and amazing filmmaking. Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, Royal Tenenbaums, Life Aquatic of Steve Zissou. Yeah, all of that. Jesse's a fan. Moonrise Kingdom. He's got a couple other things. Isle of Dogs. Wes Anderson. It's a little dry. It's not for everyone, but an absolute must. One of my favorite all-time directors. Bottle Rocket, probably in my top 10. Might even break my top 5. Love that movie. I'm a big Viggo Mortensen fan. I'm a big Sean Penn fan in terms of actors. There's more. I didn't scrape that. I'm also tell you this, a list of my cry movies. What did I cry during? A small list. There's much, much more. I have a problem with crying during movies. I have no control of my emotions. A doctor should probably see me and talk to me about it. The Natural, baseball movie. Mask, about the boy with the disease with Cher and Sam Elliott. The Elephant Man, Field of Dreams, anything with has father issues, not good for me. Magnolia, Kramer versus Kramer, The Green Mile, Murder in the First, Kevin Bacon getting abused in that prison. The Shawshank Redemption, Marley and Me, dog movies do it. My Life, and then A Dog's Purpose. A Dog's Purpose is where it's recent and the dog passes away and comes back for different people, is so fucking good. If you're a dog lover, this movie, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you, folks. And it gets shitty reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and I don't listen to movie critics. They're all fucking ridiculous to me. I'd sooner listen to what the public thinks and hear why they think what they do. Dog's Purpose actually got shit on. I couldn't even begin to tell you why. I'm also a big fan of documentaries. Some of my favorite, Roger and Me, Hoop Dreams, Thin Blue Line. I've seen Paradise Lost, 1, 2, and 3. A must-see. You must see, people see Making of a Murderer. They're seeing some of these things now that are coming to light. We had Paradise Lost was the first documentary truly where the public got involved, celebrities got involved, Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder, and really helped free these guys. These 3 young white kids, wasn't racial, in a small white town that were accused of basically some satanic shit with some little kids. and it was a horrific situation. And they got railroaded for listening to Metallica in like a small city. Super Size Me with Morgan Spurlock. I think he's an incredible documentarian, and he's fun to listen to. I'm a big fan of dystopian movies. I believe we are headed toward a dystopian future. So right off rip, I caught a list on some of my favorites. I've seen all of these. Minority Report, Brazil, THX 1138. That's George Lucas before Star Wars. That's a must-see. People don't know that. He actually made a movie. It was a USC student film that got big. THX 1138. The Running Man, Terminator, Blade Runner, V for Vendetta, Elysium, District 9, 2001, 2010, Doctor Strangelove, City of Lost Children, Total Recall, RoboCop, 12 Monkeys, and Children of Men. That is the list of movies. We can cross that out. The other influence on these movies that I wanted to say the best for last was Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino, like Wes Anderson, had a tremendous influence on me. Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs may have changed my life. It's also when I got into the whole directing production assistant thing. I wanted to be a director. I did not see it through. It's one of the things I have a regret in my life about. I lived in New York City, and I had access to people that was something I could have done, and it's a shame that I did not see that through. I have some regrets about that. As far as politics go, politicians, Ronald Reagan was the first one I paid attention to. I wasn't a Republican or Democrat. I didn't really know the difference, but I loved Ronald Reagan. I then didn't pay as much or care for somebody. I just fell for Reagan's charm. We all did. People liked Ronald Reagan. The next politician I could say that I started to like when I realized that I didn't like either side as much was Ross Perot. I liked hearing a third voice. There was something that I felt he was telling us the truth while I realized everyone else was a liar. I started noticing that everyone was a liar and even how they delivered the messages to us. Ross Perot wasn't lying. It was very direct. From Ross Perot, I went to Ron Paul. I also felt that he was not a liar. I believed he was sincere, and I liked all of his policies, and that's how I wound up to Donald Trump. I am not for Republicans or Democrats. I now probably lean Republican. All my life I was a Democrat, but I will say that that's how I got to Donald Trump. It was a process, and I'll explain in maybe another episode because it can really expand on that, the whole Donald Trump phenomenon and how that happened. As I was growing up, a couple of other role models and things that had a big effect on me. Minister Farrakhan, if you can believe it, because Minister Farrakhan, while I didn't agree with what he said in any way, I was shocked and enthralled by everything he said. When that guy came on, if I saw something about him, I stopped and watched it, man. That guy just commanded a certain respect from the people that did believe his shit, and he commanded something from me because it was shocking, and I loved the shock factor of what this guy was, and he's made his mark. Love or hate him, he's a very interesting character. Alex Jones, by the way, has a really, really interesting long-form interview with Farrakhan that's just well worth listening to. Ralph Nader, because he was someone for the people, and it was teaching me, I was learning that these people are lying to you, and they're getting over on you, and he had a huge influence being an advocate for people. Michael Moore, before he turned into a piece of shit and a libtard moron, Michael Moore was just a man of the people. He was the new version. He was Ralph Nader 2.0. I watched Roger and Me. He was talking about the same things they talked about at that Democratic debate, how they're moving all the factories out, which we already know, and General Motors and all these factories are gone. This guy was talking about that when it first fucking happened, when he didn't talk politics, when he was going around and just saying, why is everyone getting fucked here? You know, what was going wrong? He had a huge influence on that. And another man who was doing the same thing as these guys was John Stossel. And John Stossel comes from 2020. And I'm a huge fan of John Stossel. He's still around to this day. He's got a YouTube channel. What a reasonable, intelligent, questioning, smart person. Love John Stossel's shit. Always watched 2021 as a kid, something no other kids did. I watched, 48 Hours. I watched 2020. I watched Dateline. Growing up, I loved 2020. 60 Minutes. I watched 60 Minutes as a kid. No one else was watching that. No kids. Another influence I can think is just a wild card was Howard Stern. I put him there with the shock factor thing. I love doing crank calls. I love Howard Stern's comedy. I do not listen to him anymore. Don't really care for him. But Howard Stern was a tremendous, tremendous influence in me growing up. I didn't read too many books. Nothing that was all that famous, But there were 3 books that still to this day have an effect on me, and that was A Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, 1984, George Orwell, We're Living It. I don't even need to go into this. We are way past what's going on. It's fucking scary, and everything those 2 said is coming true. And if you didn't even know it, Orwell was like a student of Huxley. These 2 know each other. A lot of people don't even know that there's an actual correlation between these 2. And then Behold a Pale Horse with William Cooper, specifically Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Amazing, amazing information. He knows a lot. He's dead. They tried to kill him. Zoom to modern day. Who are my influences now? Who do I liken myself to when I listen to and whatnot? And then we're going to be able to wrap it up here, folks. My modern day, Alex Jones set me off. I will always give praise to Alex Jones because he had the biggest influence of all of the things that I'm listing here. Everyone had a part in this, but Alex Jones really let me know how really bad the shit really was. Everything else was teaching me along the way. But Alex Jones, without a doubt, had a tremendous, tremendous influence on me, for better or for worse. David Icke was someone else I enjoyed listening to. Jordan Maxwell. When I saw Zeitgeist, I was amazed by Zeitgeist. Loose Change, Jason Burmis doing his thing from Loose Change. I'm a big fan of his YouTube. Tim Pool. I love watching Tim Pool because I'm watching a guy who was basically a Vice magazine, Vox guy, lefty guy, going out to, what was that, the Wall Street thing where they all came out against Wall Street. Occupy, thank you. Big Occupy movement guy. And boy, he's watching all this unfold in front of him. And if you watch Tim Pool's videos, he's now considered alt-right. He's gone so far to reality that they're like, well, you're alt-right now because you're not in this fucking crazy world of bullshit. Sargon of Akkad, amazing, very smart guy. Tommy Robinson, big fan of. I know he's a nationalist. Tommy Robinson, we hope you get out of jail, my friend. What a true patriot. Nothing wrong with what he's doing. He's watching fucking rapists. He's in jail while these people that were raping children are getting better treatment than he is. Gavin McInnes, Steven Crowder, Paul Joseph Watson, Jordan Peterson, Mike Cernovich, rest in peace, Andrew Breitbart. Andrew Breitbart, you can say what you want about Breitbart.com. That ain't got nothing to do anymore with what that guy's agenda was and what he believed in. Andrew Breitbart had fucking balls. I personally believe they killed him. I don't believe you have a heart attack when you're jogging in your 30s and you're a jogger at that, and you're living a pretty standard life. There was that guy with no reason to be in that sort of health. I'm a big fan of Adam Carolla. I think he's another one that speaks, another great podcast. Joe Rogan. They just speak truth. Ben Shapiro, Milo Yiannopoulos, and the big lefty that I would say I would give credit to is Jimmy Dore. And while I hate the fact that Jimmy Dore spit in Alex Jones' face, and I believe he was drunk when he did it, Jimmy Dore's show, first of all, he does comedy, and I respect that. I like that he puts a comic twist on his shit. But Jimmy Dore is a straight realist, and he attacks the Dems. He attacks the right. Yeah, he doesn't like Trump. I get it. But, boy, he calls out everything, and I'm very surprised that he has the balls to do that. You don't see him tied into the Young Turks anymore. He's not down with Cenk like he used to be and all that. I would say that that's about it, folks. You just got a crash course on what makes me crazy and what shapes my mind. What do I think about and how did I get here? Why am I so opinionated? What did I learn? There's probably more to this I'm leaving out, but we just we wrapped it up in about an hour. We did a great job. I talked about some of this in episode 1. You're listening to the Mr. Josh podcast. I have an Instagram. I have a Twitter. You can check that out at MisterJoshW. You can also find me on YouTube. All these clips are on there, the Mr. Josh podcast, as well as on Facebook. I enjoy doing this. We're going to wrap this up. We're coming from the Space Coast Podcast Studios. Jesse's on the knobs and the switches. We'll have episode 8 coming up. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but I thank you for listening. Again, you just took a deep dive into my mind where you get crystallized by Crystal Eyes. Bye-bye.